equivalence between PDA and CFG. That means that given a CFG, always there exists a PDA, and usually what happens in this case, whenever there is a context free grammar given to you, you can convert this into a PDA with empty stack. Right. Now PDA with empty stack, and in the same way you can and you know already that you can further convert it into PDA with so it's not acceptance, and here again PDA which accepts with final state. So this conversion is very simple, this part, right? So assume that you might be facing difficulty in terms of constructing a PDA, and if it is asked you to construct a PDA for the final state, so you already know this conversion part, What is the thing? You just have to write a context free grammar. So sometimes you might feel that writing context free grammar is much more easier than designing the PDA, because you might have to tackle the transitions, things and all, but writing the context free grammar seems a bit easier. So even if you are able to design a context free grammar, still you can construct a PDA, right? So that conversion can help you. And vice versa, given a PDA, although this is not very trivial, but still given a PDA you can construct a equivalent context free grammar. And this proves that the language of PDAs, right, and these were non-deterministic PDAs, right. So far we were not talking about deterministic, because we said that this PDA is actually constructed by taking ENFAs and then putting a stack with it. So all these PDAs that we have studied so far are actually non-deterministic PDAs, and so the language that is accepted by or recognized by all the non-deterministic PDAs is same as the language that is recognized by context free grammars. Okay, so there is one small question by one of you. Let me try to see what. Okay, so it is yeah, why did they make videos? Oh, good question. Yeah, it was part of their assignment actually, right. So I had this assignment part given to both the batches, and last batch also I gave some similar assignment. I'm planning to give an assignment of similar kind to you guys, right, because the last assignment I am thinking in that way, so you have to make a video. So I'm still figuring out what to do and all that. Certainly the basic that I was thinking, that at place of making the videos, actually resource videos, it will be good if you can also create some video for practicing questions on a concept, right. So as I shared the videos with you, the same video will be shared with the upcoming generations. So it is a good way to keep seeing faces of your seniors and all that. And also at the same time, sometimes you don't understand concept by one person, but you might be able to understand from another person explaining it in a different words or tone. So it will be good. So I'm planning to create a group of people, and then everyone will be assigned a topic and you have to construct a video. Last time we had notes creation. So your senior batch students had created notes and they shared with me and they got marks over that. So it's like report writing, but this time I might plan, I'm still in a day or two you will be get all the instructions that you might have to create a video for practice questions on each of the concepts. So you have to, for example, if it is a pumping lemma, you have to take some few examples and you have to really make a video on that, so that it will also help you guys for understanding the concept. If you want to understand, you have solved some 10 questions on a given concept, so it gives a good practice. And at the same time, for anyone from anywhere can really go through it. Okay, so coming back to this, so I hope you have already gone through this. If not, please go through this and understand why it is important, because given a language, if it is asked to design a PDA, if you are not able to design it, you should be able to use this method, that construct the context free grammar into PDA with empty stack and further with PDA with final state, right? So and even these steps can be individually asked, that how you convert, how you convert, how you convert. So you should also learn that part. Okay. Next is deterministic PDA that I want to discuss, but before that there was something that I wanted to discuss, that this, okay, let's first finish deterministic PDA and then we'll come back to that point. So what is a deterministic PDA? So deterministic PDA, you can think that this non-determinism goes away, right? Non-determinism goes away means the stack is still there, but now you will not have multiple choices from a given state, right? So let me just write the restriction that will get involved. So your deterministic PDA, in non-deterministic PDA you had no restriction, you have with epsilon all the possibilities with anything, but here there are two conditions strictly, that the number one is that delta of QA x, right, it has at most one entry. So it has at most one entry for all the values of where your Q is part of actually possible states, A is actually alphabet, and also it can be epsilon, right? And finally x, you already know that it is one of the stack symbols, right? So for every this you have at most one entry. I am not saying exactly, I am saying at most. So that is one important thing. The second one is that if delta QA x is non-empty, right, means there is some entry for it, right, and that too for some A belonging to sigma. That means for some symbol, if you have an entry on delta QAX, then delta of Q epsilon x should be empty. Right. Altogether, what we are saying? We are saying that whenever you have an entry for delta Q epsilon x, that means for all possible values of A belongs to sigma, you will never have any entry for delta of QAX. So whenever you have an entry for, without consuming any input, if you have a transition going from one state to another state, then you will never have any other transition on that state going for another symbol, right? So that is something very important. Is it clear? So let's try quickly seeing that if we have to design a PDF or deterministic version for a grammar, let's say 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, for n greater or equals to 1. So how does it look like? So it will be very similar to the non-deterministic, but we have to keep the restriction in mind. So this is Q0. So in the beginning, what we want to do, because we know that number of zeros are at least 1, so at least 1 0 definitely you're gonna get. So 0 Z0, it becomes 0 Z0, and after that if you have 0 and you have 0, it becomes 0 0, and definitely you're gonna get a 1, so you will have 1 0 and it becomes epsilon, and after that whatever the number of 1s are coming, for 1 0 it keeps becoming epsilon. And finally, when everything is gone, so from this state for a given epsilon, you have Z0 and it goes to Z0. Right. So for similar type of grammars, you may be able to design a lot of PDAs. Now, Let's take another example. So, let's say that language is WCWR, where W belongs to AB star. Now, W is a string and C is a marker. You can understand that tells that this is the midpoint. So, again, if you have to design that, what you have to do? First, and let's say that length of W is at least 1, right. So, in that case, what at least AB or any symbol you will be getting. So, you might get as a first symbol A. So, if you are getting A, so AZ0, it should be A Z0. If you are getting BZ0 as the first symbol, so it should be BZ0. Now, after that, if you are getting further A on top of A, it should be AA. If you are getting A for B, it should be AB. If you are getting B on top of A, it should become BA. If you are getting B on top of B, it should become BB. So, everything you are just pushing, right? You are not doing anything. This step, all these 6 transitions are pushing. This is for the initial symbol and this is for the rest ones. But as soon as you get a C, what you gonna do? You gonna switch the state. So, as soon as you see C in the input, right, and C, now what all possibilities can be on the stack? Definitely not Z0, because something must have been pushed on the stack. So, C, either you will see a or for C you will be seeing a B. So, C at A you will be doing what? You will be just moving without doing anything. So, you did not push or pop anything. The same for this, you did not push, you let the top symbol remain as it is because you are not touching anything. C is just a marker telling that okay, the pushing part is over, now the popping part should start. Now at this state Q1, what should happen? You have to match with WR. So whatever is the last symbol, that should match with the whatever you have put on the stack. So it should be A, on the top of the A it becomes epsilon, B with B it becomes epsilon, and when everything is gone, then for epsilon Z0 and you go to the final state, right, done. So this is another DPDA, right. If you see, we don't have for epsilon, whenever we have a transition, we don't have any transition for other symbols. Now you might say that, sir, you said that with epsilon, if there is a transition, there is no epsilon transition with another symbol. But see, the top symbols are different, right. So if you see, when we were defining this, we said that for X, so the top of the stack symbol should also match. So that is why when it is Z0, then it's okay to define epsilon. For Z0 on the top, you cannot now have any transition going for AB here. And similarly, if you have defined A here or B here or anything, you cannot have any transition for epsilon from this place. Okay. So this is what is DPDA. Now the question is that, let's say that this is our regular language. This is our context free language. And now let's say that the language defined by DPDA is, I am just writing it, don't see that it is a standard way of writing, DCFL. So deterministic. So this is DCFL is based on the deterministic PDA, CFL is based on the PDAs or CFGs, whatever. Now, what is the relationship between these 3 bubbles? So, if you want to find out the relationship between these 2, it is very simple. What? That every D PDA is what? If you see, every D PDA can be understood as a DFA plus stack. Now, given any DFA, You add a stack and do nothing on the stack. The top symbol remains as it is, you never do. So the transition will look like delta for a QA X. Every transition goes like PX. What does it mean? That the stack symbol never changes. So this way writing the transition is same as it is saying that delta of Q comma A is equals to P, which is actually the way of writing the for DFAs, right? So every DFA, if you add a stack, it is a DPDA. So that is why whatever you are accepting by that DFA, it is accepted by a DPDA. Therefore, every language that is here, it has a DFA, and therefore it has a PDA, and therefore it is also in DCFL. Correct? So that means certainly this RL that you have understood, it is a subset of DCFL. Now, don't say that this is a standard way of writing. I am just giving it so that you can understand what I am trying to convey. So it is for the language based on deterministic PDA. If you want, maybe it is better to write language for DPDAs. Right. So this is the relationship. Now, this is one way. What is the other way? Is it a proper relationship, or is it a sometimes it may be equal or something like that? The answer is already there. This one, right? This is a language which is not a regular language, but you can recognize it by DPDAs. So there exists some languages, even the next one that you have find out, this one, this you cannot do on the DFAs. So this is not a regular language. You can prove it by pumping lemma. So therefore, if you cannot do it by pumping lemma, if you can prove it by pumping lemma that it is not regular and yet it is a language recognized by deterministic PDA, so therefore it holds that there is a strict inclusion. That means this is my RL and it is strictly enclosed in L of DPDA. Now, what about DPDA and CFLs? Right? What is the relationship between these two things? We have to figure it out. Now, the answer is, one way is very simple, again, that language of whatever the DPDAs, it is subset of certainly CFL. Why? Because if you have a DPDA, that is also in other words a NPDA, and therefore it holds. Just like every DFA is a NFA. So every DPDA is a NPDA, but not every NPDA is a DPDA. Right. Now, what is the relationship? Do we have that every NPDA has equivalent DPDA, just like we had in the DFAs, that every non-deterministic finite automata has equivalent deterministic finite automata? Or there is something else? So the answer is this language. If you see at this language, what can you say? Can you design a deep PDA for it? We were able to design NPDA, and the reason for that was that we were able to create guessing power, that okay, in the beginning you are pushing also and you may be able to switch also from the first state at any given point of time, which is giving a guessing power that okay, whether I have reached at the middle or not. If I have reached, there is a branch for that. If I haven't pushed further, there is a branch for it. So at the initial state there were branching in two different directions at every step, and that's what is guessing in two different directions. But in the DPDA you will never have the guessing, right? If you have a symbol and if there is something on the top of the stack, you have to take a single action, and that is where these DPDAs are unable to recognize this language. The answer is that you cannot really design a DPDA for this language. Although this L is a CFL, but yet you cannot design a DPDA. There is a complicated proof already there, but on the concept basis you can easily understand that. Let's say that the language is 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 0 to the power n. Correct? This is your language. You started really doing the matching. So now here you are saying that, okay, I pushed zeros here, then I pushed ones here, or after that I am pushing, sorry, this is not a, not this one, okay, 0 to the power n, let's take this. So this is definitely looks like a CFL, and this is holding for this, right? So the W is 0 to the power n1. With this is happening. Now when you start really processing it on the DPDA, suppose that you are able to design a machine which starts processing this. Now when you are processing 0 to the power n, 1, 1, 0 to the power n, so what you are doing? You are putting all the zeros on the stack, then you are getting 1, and with this one you are cancelling this one, and then you are popping all the zeros out. And you will say that, okay, we are able to do it. So why you are saying we cannot do? But suppose that this is not the string, this is not actually WWR, but this is just W. Then what? This is actually, this is W, and again you have 0 to the power n, 1, 1, 0 to the power n. Now what happens? So this WWR actually here it became as WW, right? Because every WWR, if you append it again and again, so if you have WWR and again if you have WWR, if you write it 2 times, what does it become? It becomes actually W dash W dash, correct? And we know that WW is not part of the CFL, not even CFL. Forget about that. So deterministically we don't know when to stop, while in the non-deterministic version we had the concept that you keep guessing at every point that this is the midpoint, this is the midpoint. But in the deterministic we have to say this is the midpoint, but we don't know, there is no way to find out which is the midpoint. So that is the main restriction there. Now there is another concept with the DPDAs that so finally what we got, the relationship is the following. This is your CFL, inside that you have, this is the language corresponding to DPDAs, and inside that you have regular languages, right? So this is the relationship that you gonna get. Now there is a relationship between DPDAs and ambiguous grammars. So the lemma says that every DPDA correspond to at least one unambiguous grammar. So every DPDA has at least one unambiguous grammar for the language which it was pointing to. And based on this property, actually most of the compilers and everything is built that if you are able to design a deterministic PDA, then membership problem becomes very easy, right? So most of the compilers are designed based on that. So this is in 6.4.4 in the book. You are recommended to go and read that. Not much details are given, but it will give you a basic concept of the idea that how it is done. Now let's talk about, so when we started we did not talk about grammar for the regular languages. So let us talk about regular grammar. So in the context free grammar, if you put a restriction, it becomes a regular grammar, that every production is of the following type: A goes to, let's say, AB, or A goes to just A, or A goes to epsilon. There are only these three type of productions, and that is why it is called linear grammar. Why linear grammar? That you will have at most one variable in the right hand side. This is a context free grammar, right? So that's why every regular grammar is always context free, and this is another way of proving that every regular language is also context free language. Now you might be thinking that how we can really get a regular grammar for a given. So you can have equivalence relationship between regular grammar and DFAs. So I am leaving it for you to figure it out how really does it happen, but the answer is very simple. Let's say that this is a DFA given to you, Q0, and at 0 it remains there itself, at 1 it is going here, at 1 it remains here, at 0 it comes here. I don't know what is the language. Let's say that this is our final state. So it ends with 1, I guess. That's the language. Anyway, if I have to design a grammar, the grammar is something very simple. It will be for Q0, let's say that I am marking the state as Q0 and Q1. So Q0 will have a production, because for 0 it goes to Q0, so I will write 0 Q0. At 1 it goes to Q1, so I will have a production of 1 Q1, right. Similarly for Q1, I will have at 0 it is going to Q0, so 0 Q0. At 1 it is remaining there, so it is 1 Q1. Now this is that part, and further, because Q1 is a final state, so I am going to add Q1 goes to epsilon. And this is my rule of productions. My variable set will be Q0 Q1. My start symbol will be Q0, and my terminals will be 0 1. Now if you try to really derive any string, how you going to derive? You going to derive from the Q0. Now any string that is acceptable here, you will see that you will have a derivation equivalent for this grammar. Because when you say that there is a string, so at 0 you remains at Q0. Here what is happening? When you generate any number of zeros in the left, still it will be keep deriving you zeros, and still you will be remaining at Q0. But as soon as you generate a 1, so now it will shift the derivation part to Q1 variable. Now you reach to Q1 and you can derive as per the Q1 rules. Again, if you want to derive a 0, so you will go back to Q0, right. So you should go back and read that. It is very interesting, and this is called actually right linear regular grammar. There is a left version of it also. So that is about regular language. So every regular language is also context free. Now let's talk about the properties of context free languages. So let us start with closure properties. Now in closure, what all operations we had? We had union, intersection, concatenation, star, then we had subtraction. Anything else? Oh, reversal. Anything else we are missing? So L1 union L2, L1 intersection L2, L1 concatenation L2, L1 is star, this is L1 minus L2, this is L1 R, oh yeah, finally L1 complement 1. Okay, good. So let us talk about this and this. I think we have already discussed that, so I will not go in detail of it. How we can prove it? There is a method given in the book, but by construction you can prove it very easily. It just says that when you have to do the union of two languages, suppose that a language, a grammar, context free grammar is given here, a context free grammar is given here. This is CFG 1, this is CFG 2. You can take both the CFGs, right? And you just have to do that, add another production that S goes to S1 or S2. And let's say this is S1 for is the starting symbol for this, S2 is the starting symbol for the second grammar. So you just have to add a production S goes to S1, S2, and where S1 is the starting symbol for this bigger grammar. So then this bigger grammar will start recognizing L1 union L2. If you have to do for concatenation, it is at place of this, you have to add S goes to S1 concatenation S2. That's all, done. What about a star? For a star you had to have to do that S goes to S1 and epsilon, where S1 is the grammar for L1. So these three are very simple and we have already done. Now complement, difference and intersection, we are going to talk about it soon. What about the reversal? Again, LR, if you have to find for some grammar is context free and the corresponding language is context free language, and if you reverse the language basically, then reversal of the language, whatever you get, it is also context free. How? It is very simple that if this is your context free grammar given to you for L and S1 is the start symbol, what you have to do, everything will remain same, just for every production where you have, for every production A goes to alpha, you have to add a production A goes to alpha R in your new grammar. For every production this belonging to P, you will have a production of this type in PR in the reverse grammar, right? In the reverse grammar you will have the body is reversed. If you do that, what will happen? How you prove that it holds? And concept wise the answer is very simple, because when you flip all the bodies of every production, what will happen? Everything that you will replacing, it will be actually coming in the flipped version. So if there is a string which is accepted by the first grammar, right, that string will be also accepted in a reverse way on the second grammar. Why? The reason is that every sentential form for the first grammar is also a sentential form of the second grammar when you flip it. Because any sentential form you are generating here, there is a derivation for the reverse of that sentential form on the second grammar. So therefore any terminal string that you are generating here will also be generating in the reversed way by the second grammar. So again, this is the basic concept, and you can go back and try to go to the minute details and try to understand how it holds true. So reverse also holds. Now let's talk about the intersection. So L1 intersection L2. What do you think? Is it closed or not? You should tell me after seeing this. So let's say L1 is my following grammar. L1 is 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 2 to the power m, such that n comma m are greater or equals to 1. Now my L2 is 0 to the power n, 1 to the power m, 2 to the power n. Nm is greater or equals to 1. Now let's talk about whether L1 is a context free language or not. The answer is yes, because here you are cancelling zeros with ones. You don't care about how many m's you are getting, at least one m should be there. So it is basically concatenation of two languages, 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, and 2 to the power m. This is a regular language, and this is a context free language. You do the concatenation, certainly you're gonna get a context free language. What about this one? This is again a context free language. Why? Why this is a context free language? You can write a context free grammar, right? You are pushing all the zeros, or you can design a PDA. You are pushing all the zeros on the stack, then whatever ones you are getting, you are just ignoring all the ones. You are not caring about ones. At least one should be there. After that, whatever, you don't care. And once ones are over, then for the twos you are matching with the zeros. Simple. You can design a PDA and you can write a context free grammar. But when you do L1 intersection L2, what you get? You get 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 2 to the power n for n greater or equals to 1. Now, is this grammar a context free? No, it is not a context free grammar. And you can prove it by pumping lemma, right? We have already proved it. That we cannot do matching of three things. So when you do the intersection, at times it might not be a context free grammar. Therefore, for intersection, the context free grammars are not closed. Is it clear? Any doubt? Okay, then let's see the next. What about L1 complement? So the complement is, again, let's say that so if I want to write L1 intersection L2 is equals to what? Using the De Morgan's, that you can write it as L1 union L2, sorry, L1 complement L2 or complement, right? So I can write L1 intersection L2 as this. Now, if suppose that intersection was closed under, context free languages were closed under intersection operation, then what will happen? For if L1 is context free, L2 is also context free. So if for complement always it holds that it will remain context free, then L1 complement will also be context free, L2 complement will also be context free. When you do the union of these two things, you will get a context free, because for union it is closed, and again you take the complement, it will remain as context free. But we already said that this cannot hold for L1 intersection L2. Therefore, our hypothesis that for complement also it is closed is incorrect. So, for complement, the context free languages are not closed. Right. So, they are not closed for complement operation. And if you have to do for L1 minus L2, it becomes even easier, because every complement, L1 complement is actually sigma star minus L1. Right. So, if this is the sigma star is a regular language, and therefore it is also a context free language. So, this is your first context free language, this is your second context free language, which is L1. So, if L1 is context free and you are subtracting it from sigma star, if subtraction holds as a closed, then complement will also hold as a closed, right? Why? Because if you say that subtraction, if you do from a CFL to another CFL, you will get always a CFL. Then the complement should also always remain as CFL, and the complement operation should hold for the closure property. So, therefore, what we are able to comment here that L1 intersection L2, L1 minus L2 and L1 complement, all of these properties are not closed, right, for context free languages. Now, one thing interesting part holds that if you do L1 intersection R, some regular language, then whatever the result you get, this is a CFL. So L1 means a context free language, intersection with a regular language is a context free language. The answer is because you are able to do a similar kind of construction as you have done for the product automaton for a PDA and corresponding DFA. So again, you are recommended to go back and read for the details in the book, but that's how it works. So the construction is given and the proof is given. Next, let's talk about the membership property. So these are now the decision problems, the decision properties that we had. So the first decision property is membership, that whether X belongs to a language, right? So this is that if language is context free, you can find a context free grammar. So if L is context free language, what you can do? You can design a context free grammar for it. Further, you can convert this grammar into Chomsky normal form, and I have already asked you to read the CYK algorithm, that whenever any grammar you have in Chomsky normal form, my CYK algorithm, it is a dynamic programming algorithm. What it does? It takes the string and runs the CYK algorithm and checks whether this string is part of the language or not. And how it works, this algorithm CYK, that you start with the string here, correct? So this is my string. Now what I do at the first step, at my first row, what I am creating the same number of cells as I have in the symbols in the string. Here this cell is denoting that the first symbol in what all possible ways I can generate. The second symbol tells me with what all non-terminals I can generate, this one. Next level, I will have one less number of cells, and here I am talking about that. If I am talking about this cell, it says that if you pick the first two symbols, A1, A2, with which all non-terminals can I generate. Same for the second cell, it talks about A2, A3, that which all non-terminals can derive that. If you go another level up, you get one lesser cells, and now here if you see, this talks about the first cell A1, A2, A3. 3 length of substring of length 3 with what all non-terminals I can generate it. And in the same way you keep building up, and finally at the last level you will just have one cell which talks about that from A1 to AN, whatever your string is, with which all non-terminals can it be generated. And if this cell contains the start symbol, then you say that certainly that string can be generated by the start symbol also, and therefore that string belongs to the language. So that is the crux of the algorithm, how you do the construction layer by layer. I think one layer is very simple because in the Chomsky normal form, you already have a direct production that a terminal is derived from which all non-terminals. So by looking at the productions, you can fill the first row, and after that you can keep building the above rows using the productions and the entry here. So that is how it is done. You are recommended to go and read that CYK algorithm. So this is about the membership problem. Now another property is that emptiness, right? We had the property emptiness in the how you check whether the language is empty. That means L is equals to 5. Can you guess? Anyone who can tell how to check whether the language is empty or not? Okay, no answers. See, it's very simple. Given a language, you can construct a context free grammar for it. Right. Now, once you get a context free grammar, you just have to prove that my S is non generating. And you know already that, right? How to detect that a variable is non generating? That we have already done in the Chomsky normal form. So, given a variable, check whether it's non generating. What you have to do? You start with, you find all the generating variables, right, and terminals, generating symbols. If your starting symbol is non generating, that means you are not generating any terminal altogether, and therefore the language is 5. So, given a language, you try to design a context free grammar for it, and then you check whether the start symbol is generating or not. If it is not generating, you got it. Okay. So, let us quickly review what all we have studied so far. So, we talked about context free grammars, right, how we design context free grammars. We did some practice problems. After that, what we did? After studying context free grammars, then we studied how to write it in a standard form, which was Chomsky normal form. After studying the Chomsky normal form, we talked about the pumping lemma. And again, this pumping lemma is the necessary condition, not sufficient one. So, we talked about pumping lemma, and pumping lemma is a way to prove that a language is not context free. After pumping lemma, then we entered for the push down automaton. We designed push down automaton, and basically PDAs, let me write n PDAs, and there were two versions of it: acceptance by final state and acceptance by empty stack. Further, we talked that these are actually equivalent notations. Also, we talked that the NPDAs and context free grammars, they are equivalent way of writing context free languages. After that, I asked you to read, this is what I asked you to read, and then today we talked about the properties of closure properties, and also the decision properties. Okay. So, that's all is for the context free grammar that we wanted to understand. You should go back, practice a lot for these questions and everything, and that is all end of the context free grammars. Next is that we are going to enter in the domain of Turing machines, right. Now, before entering, there are few problems in the context free grammar which are undecidable. Okay, what is undecidable? So, let me write those problems. So, there are few questions that is a given CFG G ambiguous? Second question is a given CFL inherently ambiguous? Third one is whether L1 intersection L2 is empty for L1, L2 are CFLs. So, two CFLs are given, and if you have to check whether the intersection is phi, then it's a undecidable problem, right. Third question is if you remember, we talked about equivalence, which is the decision property. The decision property here, L equals to L2, this question is undecidable for two CFLs. Right. Fourth question is that if L1 is sigma star, right, for some L1 below, which is CFL. So, some L1 which is CFL, is the set is equivalent to sigma star, even that question is undecidable. Wow. So far the questions we were getting for the regular languages, everything we were able to solve. But this is the first time we got something which is undecidable. And let me tell you what is undecidable. Undecidable are those problems which cannot be solved by any model. No algorithm can exist for such problems. If you prove that a problem is undecidable, that means you can never write a program for it. That means you can never write a program to check whether a language is ambiguous. And the answer is very simple. If you try to understand from the common sense, it takes you to the infinity. That to prove that a language is ambiguous, what you have to do? You have to actually find a counter string that has two different pass trees, but the language may have infinitely many strings. So, to prove that it is not ambiguous for any string, you have to actually go one by one to all the strings. There is no other way. There is no quick way of finding any efficient. If there were any efficient way, you would have had any algorithm and you would be able to design some kind of machine. So, next we are going to talk about Turing machine. And even Turing machine cannot solve undecidable problems. And it is said that Turing machines are equivalent, actually they are theoretical model of our computer. Actually, they are even looks more powerful that any algorithm that can exist, Turing machine can be designed for the same problem. So, it is a strong hypothesis given by, and that is what is known as Church-Turing thesis. Right, so they gave their thesis on that whenever you have a problem for which you can write an algorithm to solve it, I can design a Turing machine for it. So, what extra we get in the Turing machine? Let me give you some basic introduction and then we will stop it here, and then from the next class we are going to talk about the Turing machines. We have very less number of lectures available. So, see, we started with DFAs, right? What we had a state machine, and with the state machine we had an input tape, and on the input tape there was a header pointing to a cell and it was moving from left to right, correct? Once you read a symbol, you cannot go back to read it, that was the restriction, and you were just doing it. Now, when we came to PDAs, what we said? We said that apart from this restriction, whatever the machine you had, in this you do the following: you add a stack here, which can be of infinite size, but still you can keep memorizing the input, whatever you want to memorize, and you can use it at the later part for comparison. That's what is the PDA doing. And because of that, we were able to recognize regular languages first, and because of this stack, we started recognizing context-free languages. But we found again restriction in the sense that 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 2 to the power n, not possible. When you have 0 to the power n square, not possible. 0 to the power 2 to the power n, not possible. So many things were not possible, even for counting so much. It just can do the comparison, not more than that. The interesting part is that. So, only the comparison part is done for two symbols, counting two symbols. But if you have three symbols, sorry, even a single stack will not be sufficient. So, next, how can we increase the power? If I add, let's say, another stack here, do you think it will be it is going to increase the power of the machine in some sense? What do you think? If I add another stack with the machine, will the power of this machine will increase further or it will remain same? Anyone who has the answer, please unmute your mic and speak. Yes, Ayush. Hello. Anyone has any idea? You can say it will not increase or it will increase, whatever it comes to your mind. The answer is it increases tremendously. Anyway, why it increases tremendously? That suppose that if you had two stacks and you were dealing with 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, 2 to the power n. Now when you are reading the input, you say that for all the 0 to the power n, you push it on the stack 1. Right. Now when you start popping it for the comparison with 1 to the power n, what you do? You can push it back on the S2, right? You have another stack. So you are not losing this information. Whatever you got here, it gets pushed further on this stack. You can do that. And this way, even you can compare this with this one also. Right? So that's what the power increases, that you are not losing further the symbols from the stack. You can put it on the other stack and you can bring it back. You can do the rotation. And another interesting way, I think you already have studied that, constructing queues with the help of two stacks or something like that. But if you take one stack like this, another stack like this, and you connect it. So this is stack 1, this is stack 2. Now whenever you are pushing something from here, take it to this side. Right. When you are popping something here, you push it here. When you are popping something here, you push it here. In this way you can construct a input tape itself here, which is a modifiable input tape. So what you can do, actually, you can go from left to right, scan the whole input and put it on the stack S1. So what I am saying, that this is what is your input tape. You can put it everything on the stack 1. Right. Now if you see in the horizontal way, actually your S1 is holding this whole input in the reverse way, right? The input in the reverse way. You keep popping and push it back on S2. So once you further pop one by one and push it on S2, what you will get? This will again, this input will appear on the S2 in the original form, and then you can read it again from left to right any number of times. So the reading restriction that you had, that input should be read once only from left to right, that restriction will be gone. It is like just having these two stacks and you are shuffling from left to right any number of times. It's like you have two glass of waters and you are actually pouring from here and here and here, and you are just doing whatever, up to whatever depth you want to go in the glass. You can pour the rest in the other one, just do this whatever the thing you want to do and pour it back. So in this way you are able to construct actually an input tape which is completely modifiable. You can have the input copied there and you can modify it, any symbol at any point of time in whatever way. You can convert one symbol into some other things, you can make disappear several symbols, and all possibilities will come. And that's what is exactly Turing machine. That in the Turing machine you will have no more a input tape which is not modifiable. It becomes actually an input tape which is modifiable. The input is given once, and then you can modify, you can go left, right, you can modify these characters, and this all is possible just because of these two stacks, right? So that's what, one stack we were able to increase the power, with two stack we were able to increase further the power, and it becomes the most powerful machine that can exist. Further we will study that if we add more stacks, let's say add 5 more stacks, 10 more stacks, anything happens. The answer that we gonna derive, that sorry, the computability will not increase by adding more stacks. Whatever you can compute by these two stacks, the same you can compute by any number of stacks. The only thing might vary in terms of time, but anyway we are not caring about the time. Our goal as of now is, can you solve the set membership problem?